Welcome everyone to our ExplorAItion Conference session. Before we begin today, on behalf of the ExplorAItion Conference Planning Team, I would like to thank our generous sponsors, Adventive, Fair Chance Learning, and Taking It Global, Whitebook, and Dell Technologies. My name is Mel Malcaster. I am currently in the role of secretary with the ECHO board, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's session. What do your students want to do about Gen AI? And it is also my honor to introduce you to Mihaline Nithrasi. And we'll just introduce her by reading her bio, and then we'll pass it on to her. So Mihaline is an adolescent literacy specialist at English Media ESL, English Studies, Social Studies, and Special Education teacher with the Toronto District School Board. She's the director of the association, also the director of the Association for Media Literacy. A master's student in the Social Justice Education Department at the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education, University of Toronto. Her teaching and research interests are at the intersection of critical digital multiliteracies, citizenship, technology, and social and environmental justice. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I can't wait to learn with and from you, and I'll stop sharing my screen and you may take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining me this evening. In this presentation, I want to share the findings of the I Think AI challenge that I did with my destreamed grade 9 English class last semester. And I was pleasantly surprised and intrigued by their thinking, and I really hope that you will find their thinking as interesting as I do. No need for bios because that was already done, but I am on LinkedIn. And if you are also working in my fields of interest, I would love to connect with you there. So please find me on LinkedIn so we can continue the conversation after this conference is over. So the inquiry question that was posed to this group of students was, how might we help virtual secondary school use AI to enrich and augment the lives and possibilities for every student in our school? And I did this inquiry project with a fairly typically diverse class for the Toronto District School Board of grade 9 destreamed English students. We had slightly more females than males, with one student who identified as non-binary. Almost half of the students had an IEP, and half were either raised multilingual or had English as an additional language. The majority of them spoke a language other than English at home, and about 1/3 of the class had reading comprehension grade equivalent scores that were below grade level. We used I Think's integrative thinking methodology, which was developed by Roger Martin at the Rotman School of Business at the University of Toronto. Integrative thinking is a real world problem solving methodology that enables communities to tackle complex challenges by synthesizing opposing ideas into innovative solutions. It engages real audiences, in this case, our school community, addresses real problems, in this case, the disruption of generative AI in education, and it uses replicable processes through structured tools like the ProPro chart. This essentially enabled us to conduct a youth participatory action research project to come up with recommendations for our school. And my students presented their findings to the administration first, and then the teachers at the end of the project. And now we're working as a whole school on professional development this spring. I'm so happy about what their work sparked. And we have a view toward implementing some of these recommendations in our school in September. If you missed Heidi Sewack's presentation last week and want to know more about this methodology, I encourage you to check out the recording of her presentation, as it gives you a much more fulsome explanation of this very powerful process. So as we were working through the Ignite Curiosity stage of the problem solving process, my students learned a lot about AI. Throughout this process, students identified way more concerns than benefits for how AI might be used in education. Seriously, you should see our mind map of issues on one side and benefits on the other side. It was extremely lopsided. They came up with a lot more issues than benefits. So, this is why I'm starting with their concern in no particular order. These are their top four worries about generative AI. So, cheating. Students were surprised to learn that almost half of post secondary students admitted to cheating on a recent survey. And they pointed out that these are our future doctors and nurses and engineers and other people whose expertise that our lives depend on. They worried about a future where people with important jobs didn't actually earn their credentials because they used AI to cheat. There were many, many dark jokes along the lines of, "So the surgeon cuts you open and then the AI glitches. Now what?" And in a point that I know probably most of you will relate to, my students were actually dumbfounded as to how schools could allow this to happen and wanted to know why post secondary institutions in particular hadn't cracked down on AI cheating already. And they were really saddened by this parallel statistic in the same report that after more than 2 years of students using AI, to cheat, approximately two-thirds of educators reported having grown more distrustful of students. And students who would never, never, ever think of cheating were just crushed by the thought of being painted with the same brush as students who cheat. And so they wanted to find a way to rebuild that trust between students and teachers, which I found so endearing. Students were also really concerned about cognitive offloading and thought that too much of that would lead to lower cognition levels in society. And they pointed out that our brain is like a muscle. If we don't use it, we lose it. Distrust was intrinsically intertwined with the problem of truth decay in my students' thinking, which is why distrust and disinformation are combined in this worry. Students said they simply don't trust AI to give them correct information for a number of reasons. AI is not human, so problematically has no important human characteristics like empathy. In fact, it doesn't even understand what it's saying, right? My students said, it's just ones and zeros, it's math, it's probability. It has no idea what it's telling you. And then, of course, there's the known problem of hallucinations, or what Oxford researchers have now termed careless speech. I think I like this term better. They define it as the tendency of large language models to produce responses that are plausible, helpful, confident, but contain factual inaccuracies, misleading references, and biased informations. My students understood how this really confident tone, as it says things that simply are not true, can lull people into accepting misinformation at face value without even bothering, like without even thinking to fact check. And because large language models are trained on data from the internet, the problem of disinformation is compounded by that negative feedback loop of AI spitting out inaccuracies that are then reincorporated into its training data set. So students pointed out that disinformation spreading on the internet was already a huge problem as it is, but AI has made and will continue to make this exponentially worse as more bad actors use it to create and spread fake articles in seconds. And the ease with which deep fakes can now be created also makes it so that they can't even rely on video or photo evidence anymore. So this led students to like a relativist position, like we simply can't trust, we distrust absolutely everything we see on the internet. Nothing is true, which is problematic for democracy. Another worry was bias. Bias was a huge concern of my students. They were surprised actually to learn that AI's training data set is the open internet, most of which is North American and English speaking. They were a little bit less surprised that those engineers, coders, and developers who created are mostly white men from North America. But students worried that not only would this technology reflect the biases of the humans who created it, and the data set that it was trained on, but that the aforementioned negative feedback loop would also compound these biases. And this bias is almost comically easy to spot. I mean, we shouldn't be laughing at some of the things that it generated for us, but it did lead again to dark humor when you ask it to generate images. And seriously, if you have not done this with your students yet, this is a very easy entry point into this line of inquiry on AI and bias is just get your students generating images. And it's really stark. They notice right away what those biases are. They jump out at them. They had a lot more difficult time spotting those biases in text responses, however. And lastly, there are, well, not lastly, but my favorite is the dystopian possibilities. I had some really avid dystopia fans like myself in the class. In fact, one student was reading 1984 as we were doing this project, which is a pretty wild juxtaposition. And we couldn't help but our brains jumping straight to those warnings from movies and literature, right? Students worried about Big Brother and Terminator. They worried about robots replacing people and people becoming robots. They were especially creeped out by some educational applications currently being tested out, like monitoring students' facial expressions for quote engagement or students' movements around the school for quote safety. And again, students worried that not only could habitual cognitive offloading make us less intelligent, but that we might lose some of our humanity and become more machine like ourselves. They also worried about the impact of AI relationships on human relationships, which is something I hadn't even thought of yet. What would happen, for example, my girls asked if boys got used to AI girlfriends and then they expected their human girlfriends to be every bit as giving and appeasing and perpetually positive as AI. And there's already, unfortunately, case studies out there, right, and how this can affect human relationships. My students keep coming back to they're particularly distrustful of applications like therapy bots. And they kept coming back to this story of that 14-year-old boy who became romantically obsessed with his character AI chatbot while he was suffering from depression and withdrew from the human world, spending all his time with his chatbot. And when his conversation with the chatbot turned towards suicidal ideation, a chatbot basically told him to man up and do it already, and he did. So these stories loom large in my students' thinking. But the integrative thinking method encouraged us to focus on the positive. And despite all of my students' worries, there were a lot of potential applications for AI that really, really excited them. So, again, in no particular order, here are the top three potential applications of AI that excite my students. The students really want their teachers to explore for themselves how they can use AI to enhance teaching and learning. And we're excited about all the new learning experiences that AI might open up to allow their teachers to create, right? They thought of, for example, AI guest speakers or field trips with people or to places that we wouldn't otherwise be able to talk to or to visit. For example, a historical or fictional time or place or figure, scientific phenomena, outer space, the deep sea. And you can see all of how all of this could get really high tech and immersive when we think about how AI can be combined with hologram and virtual reality technology, which is admittedly really futuristic, very far out scenario for us. It'll be a while before schools have affordable access to those technologies, but my students were encouraged to think big. They also pointed out that generative AI could allow them to conduct science experiments that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to do because either, again, it's too expensive, we don't have the equipment or the lab space, or it might be unethical to conduct with actual human subjects. They also saw that this could be a new vehicle for creativity and exploration, and they really want their teachers to learn alongside them. The promise of personalized learning also generated a lot of excitement. My students really liked the idea of using AI to translate their coursework. to suit their learning profile, either them being taught to do this themselves or their teacher doing this for them. They liked that their learning styles could be catered to by translating course concepts into audio or visuals or a custom video game, even, or that they could use AI to capitalize on their interests. Like, hey, explain this to me, explain this boring math concept to me like you're Taylor Swift, or my favorite character or actor, influencer, or whatever. Taylor Swift probably has copyright on the chatbots already. Or that AI could adapt coursework to their skill levels by changing the reading level of a class text, or maybe translating it into their first language, or summarizing a particularly long text, or even giving them a point form outline or notes to navigate those longer, more complicated texts. I think the thing that excited them the most, however, was this idea that every student could have their very own personal AI tutor that's available 24/7. They recognize all the demands on the caring adults in their lives' time, right? And they liked that they didn't have to feel like they were pestering anyone for help. Unlike the human adults that they usually go to for help, AI never gets busy, right? It never gets too tired. It never judges. This one was key for some of my special education students who, despite all of our reassurances that there's no such thing as a stupid question, still can't help but feel like there's something wrong with them every time they ask for a question. I had one student in particular who is duly diagnosed with autism and an intellectual disability, and he became positively animated at the thought of being able to ask a chatbot like all the questions, and it would simply explain difficult concepts in as many different ways, as many different times as he needed until he finally understood, right? Like zero embarrassment with a chatbot. Students also loved that AI could coach them to improve their learning skills or to help them get organized. It could chunk large assignments into smaller pieces and give them a schedule for doing those. And this is an accommodation that I see on just about every single IEP, but that from my perspective as GLE teacher, sometimes even teachers struggle to provide for their students. So how liberating to, teach the students to do this for themselves instead of, advocating with their teacher to do it for them. They loved that it could, read a teacher's rubric and the rough draft of their paper and then give them feedback to improve that paper, or that they could use AI to have conversations to practice a language that they're learning, or they could use it to quiz them and to help them study for tests and exams. They came up with so many ways that it could be used to help them in their learning process. So after working through this process, students were better able to conceptualize better models for generative AI use in education, and they developed three recommendations for our school. So again, in no particular order, based on my students' worries and concerns, here's their three recommendations. First, students want their teachers to learn how to use generative AI, and they want their teachers to use it to create fun, interactive, and enhanced learning experiences for them. This includes the differentiation, of course, that we're already expected to do, but AI would allow us to do it more efficiently, tailoring learning experiences to a class level's unique learning profile by addressing everybody's interests, learning styles, and skill levels. But it also includes those unknown possibilities, the countless new ways to learn and be creative that generative AI will open up for us and that we haven't even discovered yet. And it's something that they want us to explore. Second, students want teachers to teach them how to use generative AI ethically and responsibly. This includes how to use it as a tutor, as an organization coach, a reading, writing, or research assistant, to provide feedback on a rough draft based on a teacher's rubric or success criteria, and of course, how to cite its use properly in MLA or APA format so that they're being completely transparent and academically honest about its use. And last, but perhaps most importantly, students want their teachers to help them think critically about generative AI, right? Go back to all those worries that my students have, and they realize there's a lot of minefields out there that they're begging us to help them navigate. And this includes, but is not limited to, issues of bias, disinformation, privacy, surveillance, safety, effects on human cognition, environmental costs, labor costs. There are so many potential topics, right? And units, and or even just lessons combined into units that we can do with students surrounding these topics in cross curricularly, right? They don't have to be in any particular class, but this is probably the biggest ask from our students. So ultimately, my students are cautiously optimistic about generative AI. On a bad day, they're not really that optimistic, but they said cautiously optimistic. They realize that, humans and therefore our technology are constantly evolving. AI is already everywhere. Employers are already demanding workers with AI skills. So ignoring AI and hoping that it will go away is simply not an option. Students also recognize that, as with any other technology, there is nothing inherently good or bad about generative AI, and that ultimately it's the user who has to bear responsibility for how this technology is used. So students said, we need to know how to use this technology ethically, critically, safely, and they need to learn how to protect themselves and their society from potential misuse or the misuses that are already out there. Students were also just adorably adamant that they want to rebuild that trust between students and teachers that's eroded over the last 2 years from unethical uses of AI. And they really hope that through the process of bringing it out into the open and having teachers teach them how to use it in an academically honest way might help to repair that relationship and rebuild that trust. And plus, they're just really excited about some of the cool things that we can do with AI to enhance teaching and learning. So, what's next for our school? My first semester students have been invited to speak with the IT business operations team that oversees technology integration and digital learning tools at the TDSB. So, they are super excited and also just a little bit nervous to bring their ideas, as they said, straight to the top, where they might have some actual influence over the board policy that we only just got notice is about to be crafted. So my second semester grade 9 students are currently doing this challenge. I'm repeating it with my next class of grade 9 destreamed English students, and they are currently in the middle of this inquiry project. And when they're done, they will also present to administration and to staff for their unit culminating activity. So I'll be collecting and collating more data from this second group of students, and hopefully that data will be used. Well, this is my aim, and it's already sort of going in this direction. The hope is that, of course, student voice is going to drive that positive change at our school. And in response to student presentations, the administration was blown away. They're like, they were talking about things I hadn't even thought about. The teachers, likewise, were really, really impressed. And this led to a conversation after the student presentations. And we are currently planning some PD sessions for staff in order to try to build capacity for addressing students' excitements, their worries, their recommendations, with an eye toward implementing some of students' recommendations school wide beginning in September. And so this has been such an empowering experience, right? Watching my students, my little grade nines, just shake us out of our institutional inertia. For the past 2 years, it seems like everyone's been waiting for everyone else to craft policy, right? Nobody wants to touch it. Administrators are waiting for boards, boards are waiting on the ministry. Nobody wants to take responsibility. So it's been really beautiful to watch my students step into that leadership vacuum and take the lead and really compel the leadership team and the teachers in our school to finally take action. So I can't wait to see what they come up with. And I can't wait to see what the staff comes up with. This is going to be a really collaborative approach. So I'm super excited. So thank you very much for your time and attention today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about our recommendations or how they reflect my students' thinking or our processes.